and the principles he talks and describes and espouses, frankly, are applicable to law. They're applicable to sales, to any aspect of business or industry. So I wholeheartedly endorse what he has to say, and we try to emulate the principles that Jim talks about. Being a values-centered practice and being keeping our eye on what the real goal is, and it's far beyond this world. Other than that, what can I say about him? You guys already know his background. He's PhD in psychology, doctor of chiropractic. He's taught probably thousands and thousands of people across the entire United States. Anyway, without any further ado, Jim Nakarada.
Thanks. Thank you. I want to start with a question, and then we're going to go through this. But why do you think we focus on psychology and neuroscience? Okay. Yes.
Starts with the brain, right?
Starts with the brain. Okay, so let's build on this for just a second. So when I was training in psychology, we talked about the power of the conscious and the unconscious mind and the impact that it has on human health, what happens to people. And what we found out was we could take somebody and somewhat hypnotize them, not true deep hypnosis, but somewhat hypnotize them. We could flip them around backwards. We could take a pencil, an eraser, we could touch it to the back of their skin, and their skin would burn. So that kind of opened up this door to what kind of control does this brain have on our body? So the oncologists got onto that. The natural medicine group got onto that. And the bottom line is you should never take, let's just take a basic vitamin, like vitamin D. You should never take a vitamin without telling it what to do. Because essentially what you're doing is you're engaging your brain. So whether it's chemotherapy or vitamins or whatever it is that you're doing, you have to engage the human brain. Now, how does that apply to success in general? So a blanket statement in the beginning would be that absolutely, unquestionably, the amount of success that you achieve is going to be controlled by what happens in your brain. The uncontrollable variable would be what's going on in the community. So think about things like 9/11. I've coached people through that. We work with roughly 72 people a week. There are all kinds of uncontrollable variables. The most difficult one is to control the one within this 6 inches of real estate. So the question would be then, why psychology and why neuroscience? Because that's what it's all about. You will find the people who do very well understand the power of the human mind. Unquestionably. I don't care if it's Einstein, I don't care if it's Napoleon Hill, they're going to tell you that whatever it is that you're doing, it can be physically, it can be emotionally, it can be spiritually, but whatever, it's going to be birthed and it's going to be directed by your mind. So that's our great challenge. That's why we focus on psychology and neuroscience. Now, we're going to go through a series of overheads that are going to make this more real, and then we'll have some procedural things at the end. But I have the easy job, you have the challenging job. My job is to teach you what I know to be true. I have zero doubts about anything we're going through. Your job, if we were at Stanford, I would say you need to receive an epiphany. You've got to open up your mind, you've got to clear your agenda, and you've got to find your one thing. One thing can change everything. You may have already gotten it when you think about the power of the human mind. I like to go a little bit deeper because I believe faith and logic and observation are real learning, and say you really should open yourself up to being inspired. Let me tell you, in any aspect of life, what will block that. They're just a series of things. The first one is confirmation bias. Do we know what anybody know what confirmation bias is? Does that make sense? Yes.
Yeah, it's our tendency to believe things that confirm what we already think we know.
Perfect. So I'm going to sit here and I'm going to find what I already believe to be true, so it's confirmed. Great. How about present bias? The way I'm wired, I'll just use myself as an example, is yes, we can talk about the future. Yes, we can talk about whatever. But right now, what I'm concerned about is today. Today. The next one is status quo bias. Does anybody know what status quo bias is? Things may not be great right now, but if I make changes, they could get worse. That's status quo bias. Habit bias, habits are thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And then semantic satiation. Does anybody know what semantic satiation is? If I stand up, like let's say, we just recently spoke, it was a while ago, New Jersey. So you speak to 500 and whatever it is people. If I stand up in front of those people, regardless of what their religious affiliation is, and I say, I firmly believe in God. The first time I say it, it hits hard. By the time I've said it 100 times, they go, yeah, I've heard that a bunch of times. What's the problem with that? It may be more important in their life at the 100th time than it is the first time, even though it hits harder. So if we are going to open our mind up, Stanford, we're going to have an epiphany. But for us, we're going to be inspired. We're going to come here to find one thing. We have to get through those blocks. We've got to find a way to deal with confirmation bias. We've got to find a way to deal with present bias. I'm just concerned about today. Status quo bias, habit bias, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And the fact that you may have heard everything we're going to talk about numerous times, but it may be more important for you today than it ever was in the past. How do we get past that? We got a couple of things to deal with. The first one is dissonance, cognitive dissonance. When we say something that confronts one of these things, human nature is to resist it, then reject it, then find a way to attack me, and then leave. So how do you get past that? Because Carl Jung came along, who I think is one of the greatest thinkers. He said, whatever you resist, any aspect of life is going to persist. We've got to get to the point where we move past that. Now, so how do we deal with it? Well, we take a look at what's on the line. And it's our marriage, our family, our physical, emotional, and spiritual health, making enough money to get past paying bills, have a good standard of living, get out of debt. Without that, it's a choke chain around your neck 24/7, and your relationship with God. Now, why do I put that in there? Because we know if you cannot put butter on the bread, or you cannot afford to buy the bread in the first place, you will put the things that are most important on a back burner. Ideally, it wouldn't happen, but it does. So, what are we going to do? Liz Wiesman, I don't know if you've ever studied her, wonderful. You should listen to her YouTube. You should look it up. It's called The Power of Not Knowing. The Power of Not Knowing. What's that?
How do you spell her last name?
I think it's Weisman. You will love the talk, because here she is brilliant, working with major companies, and the big obstacle is we think we know too much. So we've got to get to the point where we embrace the power or the benefit of not knowing. The next thing is we need to become what we call a question thinker. Right? A question thinker. Go back in time, probably the 70s, the early 70s, there was a thing called the SQ3R method of studying for people who have learning disabilities like myself. The SQ3R method of studying: survey, question, read, review, recite. What you've got to learn how to do is turn everything into a question, become a question thinker, and then focus on gap management. This is a lot for the beginning, but turn everything we talk about into a question and then manage the gap. Here's the ideal, here's the real. Just move up from where you are right now by small percentages. The blessing called work. My dad was born in 1920. My dad went through the Depression. My dad's dad died young. My dad and all of his brothers, there were 4 boys, 3 girls, that were raised in a 2-bedroom apartment. My dad and his brothers all went in the military. They took their checks and they sent them home to my grandma so she could raise my 3 aunts. Well, when I was caught up in psychology, it was very passion driven. And I remember I looked at my dad and I said, "Dad, you love your job?" And he looked at me like, "Jimmy, are you a freaking idiot?" He said, "It puts clothes on your back. It puts food on your table. It puts a roof over your head." And then he looked at me in the way only Dad could look and said, "You better learn how to love that." My dad helped me avoid one of the greatest keys to depression, which is broken expectations, lead to hurt feelings, lead to anger, lead to depression. My dad was straightening out my expectations about work. It's not going to be what everybody says. We call it work, but there's a blessing to it beyond even those things. Let's look at it. I don't know if you know Ken Isolt. Bright guy, writer for Psychology Today. He said, evidence is increasing that retirement is not good for you. Not good for you. So we looked at it because there's a lot of money being made on getting you to not do very much. Quit your whatever it is that you're doing. I'm going to show you why that doesn't work. Initially, the data shows you will have a decrease in your stress and you will have an increase in your free time. There's data for that. But the data also shows within a very short period of time, you have a 40% chance of being, increased chance of being clinically depressed. Have you ever been around somebody who is clinically depressed? We're not talking bad mood here. We're talking frank clinical depression. You have a decrease in executive functioning. Now, I had to look into that to see what do they really mean. It's your ability to focus. You have a decrease in episodic memory. That's your ability to know where you are in the world and what you're supposed to be doing. You have double the rate of cognitive decline. Now, when we think about cognitive decline, we think about just sometimes age-related memory issues and stuff. No, we're talking about frank dementia and Alzheimer's. You have a 60% increased chance of being diagnosed with one or more physical illness. See, I think this is what my dad was kind of trying to get to me. Get out of all this garbage you're being taught and learn to value work. So, Covey came along. So he said, if you have purpose and meaning in your life, you're going to strengthen your immune system and you will extend your life 20 years. Now, we know he died just before he was 80 years old, fell on a bike, hit his head, and he died from the effects of that. But what a lot of people don't know is he was writing 8 books. He believed in work. So I did research. I went to Harvard. They spent 18 years studying people like Brian. They found out if he works 1 year past retirement age, which we've already done, right? We're there. We decrease our risk of dying 9 to 11%. Here's what got me. I liked the 9 to 11%, but it was regardless of his health. It doesn't matter what Brian, just picking on you, or me, is dealing with. We're going to drop his risk of dying 9 to 11% if he works just 1 year past, past retirement. Goes a little deeper. I didn't even know this existed. There's a National Library of Medicine that tracks all things. They studied people who were 50 years old or older, who retired, and they compared them to people who were working. They had an increased rate. They didn't do a percentage. but they said cardiovascular disease, but they really limited it to stroke and heart attack. Then there was another group, I don't remember the name, but they studied 12,282 people. 12,282, or 825, sorry, over 51 years old. If you have purpose in your life, figure this one out. You decrease the progression of chronic illness. The 2021 U.S. Census Bureau studied, and I don't know how accurate this is because so many people live together now. Okay, all right, so Census Bureau, they studied people 55 to 64. They have psychologically proven to have the highest rate of divorce of any other age group. They actually call it, we call it now in psychology, the gray divorce. And there's reasons for it. Now, I say this number is off because so many people live together now. We don't know. We do know if you want to decrease your rate of having a successful marriage, live together before you get married. We know that. We can prove that. It doesn't work the way people think. But what they found out is they have the highest divorce rate of any group. But here were the reasons. The first one they said was loss of identity. Who am I now? What do I do? It's connected to your work. The second one was most of us don't have as much money as we thought. And so we've been able to live however we've lived, and then that changed. The biggest one they said was, though, we lose our sense of independence. So we studied that. And the independence really was too much time together. These women are like, I like it when he gets up and goes to work. Because then I have a break. Now he's not working. He follows me around like a puppy. And that is creating a lot of problems. The anti-aging people jumped in and they said, okay, we're going to go a little deeper here. You stop learning, you stop contributing, you stop feeling relevant, and you are old whether you're 20 or 80 years old. Now, as important as all that data is, I'm going to share with you, because we do full disclosure, what really matters to me. Gordon B. Hinckley, 3 chapters of his life. The first chapter of his life, work is the best antidote for worry that he knew of. You worried? Go to work. I just had somebody the other day saw a incredible number of people in one day. This person has a high propensity towards anxiety. And I asked him, I said, when you were busy, were you worried? He said, no. I said, then be busy. Work is therapy. Number 2, when he got older, study people. I got to tell you, you've got to study the entirety to really understand where the depth of these quotes. You have to study them throughout their lives. So as he got older, then he said, most people my age are sitting in a recliner, taking prescription medication, and listening to soft music. Pause. Where's the contribution in that? Now we're much older at this point. Now let's go even older to when he had advanced colon cancer and he went to the doctor with his son. I was in a meeting with his son when he told us about that experience with the doctor. The doctor told him this chemotherapy is too strong for someone your age. We don't, they didn't know if he could survive it. So he asked the doctor, he said, I've got 3 questions for you. Number 1, will I be able to live on my own? Number 2, will I be able to work a full day at the office? And then he said, number 3, will I keep my hair? That's the funny part. Let's drop down a little bit. Neil A. Maxwell went through leukemia, several years. I studied it. We all talk about how after he went through that, how absolutely devastating it was on him. In fact, in a great interview with him, he talked about talking to the doctors in the middle of the night who were exhausted and telling them, I so appreciate everything you do for me. You doctors are wonderful. And the doctor looked at him and said, oh, we may be great, but it's the nurses here. The people who are working all different shifts that are really great. Now, fast forward. You all have heard to shrink is worse than to die. But what you haven't heard is at the end of that interview, when they were talking to him, he said, I believe in the gospel of work, and he said, the law of the harvest. This is after going through chemotherapy, which literally rocked him, because they gave him as much as they possibly can, and then pulling it all together, a quote from somebody who's a great mentor to me was Joseph B. Worthland, when he said, work is therapy for your soul. I want a stronger, better soul. So I've learned to look at work from a different perspective. Now, here's where we're going to get just slightly negative, but I don't want you to think it just applies to us, because I coach osteopaths, I coach dentists, I've helped medical doctors. In one way or another, it affects everybody. But I want you to understand the circumstances that you work in. This is not about medical doctors. This is about the American Medical Association. This all started, they want to dominate healthcare cradle to grave. That is their entire goal. Now, we could look at the motive, whatever it is, but their goal is you're born, you die, you're in their system, you get passed back and forth. Well, there was a study done in the 80s on alternative healthcare where they proved that billions of dollars were going to alternative healthcare practitioners, and chiropractors were in the top 3. That started the Quack Watch. Now, all of a sudden, look at all the people that are getting hurt. Well, they were threatened. Competitive psychology always goes, you ignore them, you take shots at them, and you join them. Well, there's no interest in joining. So let's go to the law. Let's go to the law. This is not personal opinion. You can look this up. This is in the 80s. I think it culminated in 1987. It was the AMA versus Wilkes, or Wilkes versus the AMA. What took me back when I studied it is it was antitrust, and they lost. Now, I talked to a pediatric researcher. We're not talking about medicine. We're not talking about doctors. We're talking about this organization. I said, what do you think about them losing? He said, doesn't surprise me. I said, what do you mean? He goes, they are the most corrupt organization in the world next to the mafia. They will do whatever it takes. Again, think this organization, not practitioners. Here's what they were found guilty of. A lengthy, systemic, successful, unlawful boycott to restrict cooperation between MDs and DCs to eliminate the chiropractic as a competitor in the U.S. healthcare system. Not my words. Look it up from the summary from Wilk. Their goal was to undermine chiropractic schools, undercut insurance programs, conceal evidence of the effectiveness of chiropractic care, subvert government inquiry into the effectiveness of chiropractic, promote activities that control the monopoly the AMA has over healthcare. Not my words. When that didn't work and they were found guilty, they went ad hominem. Ad hominem is a fallacious, deceptive strategy that avoids discussing the topic, a genuine discussion of the topic, by attacking the person. That resulted in what we call the second O doctor. My name's Dr. Naccarato. Oh, what kind of doctor are you? I'm a chiropractor. Oh. We've all heard it. Never once get it with my PhD. Never once. With my DC, all the time. So what's the result of that? Now, Travis, we just did a thing in your office, and you had an optometrist there. Do you remember what he said? He said, it's not just chiropractors, it's us as well. And then remember, I'm trying to think of who it was, brother-in-law was in osteopathic school, and they said, not just the optometrists and the chiropractors, it's the osteopaths. See, and then I could go on and on. I've helped DMDs and the DDSs. They all feel the same way, but what they don't understand is it's just a concerted effort to go cradle to grave for everybody. But here's the impact it has psychologically on people. And I want you to ask yourself, thinking of the blessing of work, if it affects you. Number one, you get resilience fatigue. You just become like a worn out soldier. Worn out soldier. Once you get people fatigue, then after you get resilience fatigue, you get people fatigue. Once you go from that, then now you just get done with people. When you're done with people, then you end up with relationship fatigue, which we're going to talk about in the study of two surgeons and why they're successful. The problem with it is we then go vertical. I want you to imagine a narrow stairway, and there's room for one person at the top. In a vertical environment, the goal is to put everybody below them. In a horizontal environment, so the goal is to dominate or conquer, control. People create distance to regain control. In a horizontal or psychologically healthy environment, everybody's on the same row. We may be different, but we're equal. We have different roles, different talents, different abilities, but we are equal. Here's the problem, and I will tell you, do you know we learned a lot about this is in law, because they've got to get in there and they've got to break this thing down and be able to look at it from all these different angles. And what we found out was a very strong propensity towards negativity, which then led to depression, which then fed this vertical thing. He started the first movement in positive psychology. He did the master's, I did the PhD, but his whole thing was we have to help these people that have such a difficult job all day long. So here's the problem with this. What it results in is generalized anxiety disorders. There's episodic anxiety and there's generalized anxiety. Episodic anxiety is like, I have a panic attack. Well, we know how to pull people out of that and calm them down. The problem with this kind of psychology is it leads to generalized anxiety, which means that's now my normal state. So if on a 0 to 10, we want to run at a 5. If you have generalized anxiety disorders, you're at an 8, and that's your new norm. The problem is generalized anxiety is like hypertension. It breaks everything down. It's not the problem with blood pressure. It's what's a blood pressure going to do to your heart? What's it going to do to your kidneys? What's it going to do to your other organ systems? It's the same thing with generalized anxiety disorders. It creates a new disease. I want you to pay attention to this. It exacerbates whatever existing disease you're dealing with. It causes premature aging and premature death. This is why we bring psychologists on board when people have cancer. Because if we don't get them out of a generalized anxiety state, they can't heal. Generalized anxiety is like hypertension. But why? Now we're going to go neuroscience just for the minute. It's the amygdala. The amygdala is part of the limbic system. The limbic system regulates emotions. When it gets hijacked, it goes fight or flight. But what they're doing is they're engaging their amygdala, and what happens with that is you create widespread body inflammation, which then either creates a new disease, exacerbates an existing disease, causes premature aging and premature death. I love the work by Bernie Siegel, who was a cancer surgeon. You can't do this if you don't bring people on board to help us get out of this generalized anxiety state. Now, obviously, we need to recraft our perspective on adversity or difficulty. In the world today now, we're looking for an easy way, but what we need to do is look for a way to strengthen ourselves to be able to handle adversity. So let's look at the data. Nothing educates or refines or strengthens like adversity. Number 2, nothing reveals our character or our real commitment to be successful like adversity. From commitments, it reveals whether we are conditionally committed or unconditionally committed. If I'm conditionally committed, right, I've got a very short list of what I'm willing to do and a long list of what I won't do. If I'm unconditionally committed, it's the reverse. My list of what I'm willing to do is huge, and my list of what I'm unwilling to do is very small, as long as it fits my integrity. The third thing was, and this is again, we look at it from psychology now. So we go from the Depression, we go through other challenging times historically, and what we can conclude psychologically is adversity is the number one excuse that success will never accept. So, with this understanding, we're going to Vietnam. At Vietnam, we took a bunch of engineers. We told them, go in a tent, play cards, have fun. Every single one of them developed diagnosable neuropsychiatric problems. The conclusion was, you cannot put an achiever on hold without consequence. We are made to contribute. We are made to achieve. The problem is that tent in Vietnam represents a whole bunch of different tents in our life. We have physical tents, we have emotional tents, we have spiritual tents, we have financial tents, we have relationship tents, but the principle is the same. Go on hold and you watch what happens. So once you go through that, you say, okay, I understand the tent. I'm going to get back in the game. Now you got to get to and resolve the root. We're going to do a little bit of psychotherapy. You've got leaves, tree, yellow. You've got roots. Human nature is go to the leaf. Covey did a lot of work with this. And go buy natural green paint, slap a coat of green paint on it, and then call it good. The problem is, no matter what that leaf represents, could be money, could be relationships, could be personal health, could be whatever, the tree will die because the problem was at the root issue. So I have done my own research to find out what are the common things that we find at the root. Do you know what the number one is? Fear. Number two, guilt. Guilt is over what I've done. Number three, shame. Shame is over who I've become. Number four is pride. Number five, an inability to forgive. Not only other people, but ourselves. Number six, we don't believe in ourselves or what we do anymore. And then number seven, financial psychology. And then the big kahuna. Why did I choose to do what I chose to do? We're talking about being a doctor, but it could be a lawyer, it could be a dentist, it doesn't matter. It could be an architect, it doesn't matter. My research shows in one way or another, the people who make this choice do it because they want to be self-employed. That's appealing. Number two, they want to have a flexible schedule. That's appealing. Number three, they want to make a ton of money. That's very appealing. And then number four, they want to have fun. That's appealing. But here comes my research. They did not choose what they're doing for any of those reasons. They chose what they are doing right now in any discipline because life is school and we learn by experience. And my experience and research proves we chose what we do because we needed to learn how to forget about ourselves. Number two, we have to learn how to have compassion on other people. Number three, we need to learn that no matter how smart you are, the talents and abilities you have, God gave you, you're just here to expand on them. And then finally, he expects you to use those talents and abilities in all industries to find and serve people, regardless of how difficult it is. So if I'm Brian Larson and I walk through that door and I remember these things, I put my key in that door and I open it up and I say, I am going to forget about myself. Number two, as I walk right over here, I am going to have compassion on all these people who are suffering. Number three, even though I did great in law school and I passed the bar and I went to a really good law school, great law school, the talent and ability that I built on, God gave me, and He expects me to use them to find and serve people no matter how difficult it is. Now you can just imagine walking through that door, we now have a different person greeting this front desk person. We have a different person walking down this hallway. We have a different person walking into that office. So we say, okay, well, where's business? It's directly connected to that. There will never be a shortage of business if we focus on those four things. Not just intellectually, but we actually become them. Because then what happens is Brian can say, I know who I am, I know what I'm here to do, and I am undistractable. Do you realize those are the three keys to power? Success. Know who you are, know what you're here to do, and then be undistractable. And it only happens when you do those things. So, whatever we have to face, this is what I love about this, what we're doing for work. Whatever we have to face, we have to become a resilient overcomer. Now, you look at your situations and you have seen this. I have seen people who are so at the top of their game physically that were super sick, and some of them were even told they were dying. I have seen people emotionally debilitated, if not completely incapacitated, from significant emotional issues at the top of their game. I have seen people who have had their spiritual roots, faith knocked out from underneath them, that are now pillars of strength. I have seen people in marriages that were horrible, that have now got the best, the most tender, the most loving marriage out there. Some of them even divorced. I have seen people who were financially billionaires that were bankrupt multiple times. There is a turnaround. If you commit to be a resilient overcomer, you have two options. You're going to become it or you're going to defy it. Those who defy it become resilient overcomers. Now, I study the greats, and I have since I was 17 years old. And when it comes to being a resilient overcomer, one of the greatest greats is Spencer W. Kimball. Let's look at his beginning quote and let's look at his ending quote. His beginning quote is, "We are not measured by the trials that we meet, only by those that we overcome." Let's look at his life. When he was young, he had typhoid fever. He had facial palsy, facial paralysis, that the medical records show now we think was Bell's palsy. He had rheumatic fever. He had smallpox. 4 of his sisters died, and his mother died before he was 11 years old. This is not a bumper sticker. Not a bumper sticker. As an adult, he had strokes that were so bad that they warranted 3 subdural hematoma surgeries. 3 subdural hematoma surgeries. He had throat cancer that was so bad, he had to have 1.5 of his vocal cords removed. He had so many MIs, which started kind of, I think, in his 50s, that he qualified for simultaneous valve and bypass surgery at 77 years old, which was unheard of at the time. He had so many boils on his shirts that when he would go speak, he had to take so many boils on his body. When he spoke, he had to take extra white shirts with him and change them because they would be oozing through his shirts. And do you know what his concluding, he died at 90. Do you know what his concluding comment was? I suppose if I have learned anything in my life, it is that we are to keep moving, keep trying as long as we breathe. What he did was take us from these psychologically damaging questions. Why me? Why this? Why now? To get over it, the real questions are, why not me? Why should I be exempt? Why not this? Why not now? Let's talk about resiliency, and then we'll talk about some procedures. I need to take you back in time to when I studied with Hal Miller. Hal Miller was a PhD in psychology from Harvard. He was big into motivational psychology. My responsibility was ventromedial hypothalamic hyperphagia. Basically what I did was I took rats and I would make an incision in the top of their head. We would drive this little thing in, we would lesion part of the brain, and then we looked for weight gain. We were trying to prove this connection between damage to that part of the brain and then weight gain. What we found out, which was very interesting, is I could take a normal weight rat and make him to the point where his hands were like little flippers just by messing with one little part of the brain. What we didn't realize, which we eventually came up with, was the power of a set point. There are neurological set points, there are psychological set points, there are all kinds of set points in our life. A set point is a point where a variable in your life stabilizes. It could be all kinds of different things. It could be the number of new patients you have. It could be the amount of patient visits, number of patient visits, services, collections. It can be the health, your personal health. It could be your marriage. It could be whatever. It is all related to a set point, including the amount of money we make. Now, I will tell you that in success psychology, they will tell you, draw a circle, put 3 to 5 people in it, and tell me how much money they make. That's going to tell you how much money you're going to make. I say something totally different. I say draw a circle, put your 3 to 5 closest friends in it, forget the money thing. It's going to tell you more about you than it is them. And one thing it will reveal to you are your set points. And I'm going to show you how that happens. So, how do we get these set points psychologically? Think of input or feedback. You can go back to the second O doctor. Things I've heard, feedback I've gotten, that with time, I believe. Or experiences I've had, or experiences I'm having, that with time I've personalized and I believe. But the question is, what if I'm wrong? But yet that is determining my set point. The gap is never closing between what I believe and what I do. Wouldn't that be nice? The truth is, it's in closing the gap between what I believe and what's true. That's the challenge, especially when you think about set points. Good news is, this brain is neuroplastic. It can change its set points if you're willing to work with a coach and be coachable. That's the tough part. And you're willing to write a creed. Let's go through a few common set points that I would venture to say every single person in this room on some level has to deal with. Number 1, forgiveness. Our success is blocked at our lowest level of forgiveness. It's blocked. Think about broken expectations, think about hurt feelings, think about anger, and think about depression. You want to get rid of the depression? Go back to the broken expectation. You want to go back deal with the broken expectation? You're going to have to go to the bottom and you're going to have to find out, is there something, someone that I need to forgive that I haven't? And that includes ourselves first and foremost. I'm going to give you two examples. The first example I talk about all the time because it just takes me back. This beautiful girl is walking down the street on her way to being a professional model. A guy walks by with a razor blade, slices her face. Totally derails her career. They followed her psychologically about a decade, and she was truly a happy woman. And they asked her, how can you be happy after having something like that happen? She said, because I chose to forgive that person. Because if I didn't forgive him, she said, I realized that the scar on my face would be secondary to the scar on my heart. Now go read Maxwell Maltz's work, the famous plastic surgeon. How many scars off people's faces he took off, but the psychopathology remained because it's a scar in the heart that does the damage. Second story. I met with a man who was extremely successful, made a lot of money. He actually came up to me in the gym and he said, I hear what you do. And I said, okay, I didn't know him. He said, I'm going to ask you a question. I said, what's up? He was really brazen, kind of ticked me off a little bit the way he did it. But he said, if you were going to teach me to do one thing to improve my success, what would that one thing be? And I said, I thought about it for a while. And I looked at him and I said, repent and forgive. He threw his arms in the air in a gym in front of everybody. He went like this and he went, don't give me that crap. Don't give me that crap. Now I'm like, not slightly ticked, I'm really ticked. And I looked at him, I said, hey man, you asked me a sincere question. I am giving you a sincere answer. Repent. Turn away from any thought, feeling, behavior you should not have. And then forgive everyone, including yourself, or your life will be blocked there. You want to make more money? I'm telling you to start here. Now this brazen weightlifter guy, I can remember I was doing curls, looking at him, he starts getting really teary-eyed. He starts crying. He goes, you know what, you're right. He said, my son was killed in an accident. And I kind of got the feeling it wasn't a car accident, it was some other kind of accident. He said, I met with someone in my church, and he looked at me and he asked me one question. Have you forgiven that man? And he said, no. He said, your life will never progress past your lowest level of forgiveness. So now this big brazen weightlifter is all teary-eyed going, you're right. Forgiveness is that powerful. He said, but it took me 6 months of hard work to forgive. So the first set point is forgiveness. Now psychologically, it's not letting people off the hook. That's between them and God. It is letting go of any negative emotion that you carry, because it is an emotional cancer, period. We are dealing with this, I cannot tell you in how many circumstances, with people who are seriously sick, and it's like, what's this got to do with anything? It's everything. You've got to learn how to let go of all negative emotions, trust God, and then trust that He can change your heart. He can heal you. Number 2, you got to change your relationships. Sean Aker, great guy, wrote a book called The Happiness Factor. Proved 200 scientific studies. I guess that gives them credibility. 275,000 people proved happiness, precedes success in nearly every aspect of life. In other words, happiness is not the end result. Happiness is the driver of success. So I say, so what you're telling me is Sean was right. Happiness drives you want to be more successful? Work on that relationship. Because what does the data show? Your success will never exceed the number of relationships you can handle. If you're seeing 100 people a week, it's because you can handle 100 relationships. If you're seeing 75, you can handle 75. If you're seeing 200, you can handle 200. There is a direct connection between the number of relationships you can handle and the people you can see. The third one is, what about our associations? Now, this is a little difficult. Go back to what I said. Draw the circle, put the people in it. Going to represent how much money you're going to make. No, it's going to tell you more about you than it's going to tell you about them. Here's what we know psychologically. Now, I have a difficult time when they say hardwired, because I'm an epigenetic nut, which means I believe these are modifiable factors. But this is what they say. My brain is hardwired to connect to the brain of another person. It's called interneural synchronization. It creates what we call unconscious mimicry. Go to lunch with somebody who has a strong British accent. I promise you, for the rest of the day, you're going to be thinking with a strong British accent. So here's where I was wrong. Unconscious mimicry. I used to say, all right, I'm going to help you with this. Put a big brick wall in front of you. Keep the negativity out. Didn't work. Then I said, you got to put a moat in front of you. Keep the negativity out. Didn't work, especially in today's world. I've done this for 34 years. I cannot tell you what's happened, but I will tell you the seriousness of the stuff that I see people go through in the last between 3 and 5 years is exponentially greater than it ever was before. Something has happened in the last 3 to 5 years. So, what I learned was, it's not enough to put a big brick wall in front of you. It's not enough to put a moat. You've got to now go to Stanford. And what I mean by that is, surround yourself with the most positive people and influences you can. Otherwise, you are developing interneural synchronization and unconscious mimicry. I had a very, very good doctor. His wife had very advanced MS. Every day he would come home, he would close the blinds, he would turn the lights down. He basically lived as if he had MS to help her get through this time. He said, what do you want me to do? I said, number one, I want you to take care of your wife. But number two, I want you to open the blinds. I want you to live your life. You are living as if you have a disease you do not have, and it's crippling you. So you got to find a way to do both. And it's very hard for me to even mention that because I have a daughter-in-law that has MS. So this is very personal to me. And I admire my son for many things, but one of them is that he does what he needs to do to take care of her, but he is doing the best he can to live a full life. He's not living as if he has a disease he doesn't have. So I went to Stanford and I studied it, and I call it the ABCDs of Stanford. The number one, the A is, those people you need to surround yourself with are visionary. I want you to look at this quote. Having a vision of where we are headed makes the chances of us getting there infinitely more likely. However, I have to say, not so fast. There are two things that get in the way, even if you have a vision. Number one is, you cannot have a B option. B options are killing people in today's world. Everybody wants to make something, sell it on Amazon, make a ton of money. It's killing people. You look at the success of the world. Nobody succeeds with a B option. You have to close the back doors. We all read the stories about the ships and burn the ship and you can't turn around and go back. Well, it teaches a real principle. You want to win the battle? You got to burn the back doors. You cannot have a B option. If you want to go forward, you cannot have a B option. I study immigrants. Immigrants are the best example of people who could barely get over here. They had enough money for a one-way ticket, and once they got here, they couldn't go back. There was nothing beneath them. There was no B option. They went on to create some of the greatest successes in the world. The next one is you got to get rid of Fremont. I haven't found one person yet that doesn't have some Fremont in their life. Now let me explain to you what I mean by that. I worked with a doctor in Fremont, and because I studied motivational psychology, which is basically all price and motive driven. If the price is greater than the motive, you're not going to do it. If the motive is greater than the price, you're going to do it. If you want to help somebody, build motive. Just build motive. So I went into this conversation to build motive. And what I wanted to ask her was, and I really want you to pay attention to this. What I wanted to ask her was, tell me what you have to gain by being successful. But I had a dyslexic slip and I said, tell me what you have to lose by being successful. That's when she started crying and saying, you don't have enough psychotherapy in you for me. And I said, what do you mean? She said, if I'm successful, I have to stay in Fremont. And I hate Fremont. So what I learned was we were wrong. The operative difference between where I am now and where I want to be is not what do I have to gain by getting there. It's what do I have potentially to lose if I get there. So let's look at it physically. I've got people right now who say they want to be busier, but their real concern is if they're busier, they can't handle the physical load. I just can't handle it. It's like Covey taught the goose and the golden eggs. You know, we kill the goose, try and get all the eggs out. I say, very few people do that. But I will tell you what they'll do is the goose has got the golden eggs. They're going to put their foot on its throat so it only breathes enough to achieve what they're achieving right now. They will not let it breathe anymore. In her case, it was because of Fremont. In a lot of doctors' cases, it's physically, I just can't handle any more than I'm doing now, or I don't want to handle any more than I'm doing. The next one, the E, is emotionally. You might find this difficult, but I have found so many people that hang on to their depression, hang on to their anxiety, because if they give it up, then they have to square off with something they don't want to square off with. I'd rather be depressed than have to face my marriage. I'd rather be depressed than have to face my finances. I'd rather be depressed than whatever. There is a Fremont in emotional problems. Spiritually, this one took me back. I love it when people will sit down and have an honest conversation with me about maybe concerns they have about their spiritual values, doctrine, whatever it is. What I didn't realize was when I was putting it out there and saying, well, why don't we talk about this? Why don't we resolve this? What I was getting from them was, nah, not so fast, because if we resolve it, then I got to go back to church, and I really don't want to go back to church. There was a Fremont. In relationships. I met with two people I was convinced I could save their marriage. Convinced, 100%. I would drive to California to my office to meet them days I didn't have to work, earlier than I needed to be there. I was going to pour everything I possibly could into that situation because I knew we could save that. And in fact, I remember the day I looked at both of them and I said, this is not so bad. I've dealt with a lot worse. What I didn't realize was she was looking at me saying, yeah, you know what? It might not be so bad, but if you help me fix my marriage, then I have to stay married to him, and I'm done with this guy. It's a Fremont. Financially, the same thing. I cannot tell you how many people right now are keeping their incomes down to a dull roar Because if they let them come up, people are going to expect them to be financially responsible. Whereas with their incomes are down here, nobody's putting any pressure on them. They can stay right at the level they are in their life. They're comfortable there. But if they start making more money, then people are going to go, hey, you know, you can dramatically change your circumstances. The next one is the B, the mind. Let's go back to the hardwiring. There's something that happens. If you have somebody who's got this going on, it may be years since you've spoken with them, and as soon as you connect with them again, it's like the conversation never ended. They pick up exactly where they were. What they don't realize is this is hardwiring, or soft wiring, however, because I'm the epigenetic guy, but it's in the brain that we're wired to connect that way. Now here's the problem. I'm going to save you countless numbers of psychotherapy sessions with this. What we say is, everybody says the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. There's no data to prove that. The data shows the grass is greener wherever you water it. Psychologically, you have two options. You're going to water your psychological flowers, or you're going to water your psychological weeds. Those are your only two options. If you keep it up for 6 to 9 months, it will become a habit. Now, what I like about this from a psychotherapeutic perspective is some people are getting energy from watering the weeds. The weeds are growing and growing and growing, and they get energy from it. They connect with it. Other people have disciplined themselves to water the flowers. They grow, 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 grow. The bottom line is, whatever you have done or are doing or will do for 6 to 9 months will become a psychological habit, period. If you've watered weeds for 6 to 9 months, it acknowledges both of them are there. But if you water weeds for 6 to 9 months, you will have more weeds. It will be your habit. If you water flowers for 6 to 9 months, it will be your flowers, and that will be your habit. Now, why is that a problem? Well, Emerson tried to say this. He said, what we persist in doing gets easier with time, not because the thing changed, but our power to do is increased. What Emerson didn't understand, it's like Aristotle when he said, a life unexamined is not a life worth living. You know, they don't realize the depth of these statements because of when they said them, but Emerson was brilliant because he was way ahead of neuroscience, which is all about neural grooving. So why is, if I water my weeds for 6 to 9 months, that becomes my habit, why is it a problem? Because of neural grooving and synaptic connections. Creates a habit, gives you power. Here's the bite. It can work for you, or it can work against you, depending on what you're watering. C, D, and then we'll do a few procedures. I love studying Jon Huntsman Sr. My beginnings of studying him was probably with his book, Winners Don't Cheat. Then with the next book, it was kind of a revised version of that. But when you study him, you know, in 1970, he was 32 years old, and he was hired to work at the White House, and he was in charge of welfare, social services, and Medicaid for the entire United States. Entire United States, 32 years old. He was there for a few months, and then I don't remember who it was, but somebody called him to interview him to be a special assistant to the president and secretary to the White House. He went through 2 days of interviews with 14 other people. The concluding question to him was, are you a full tithe payer? The guy who asked him that question said, not one person in the White House. And Huntsman said, yes, sir, I am. I have been since I'm a little boy. And then he gets emotional when he talks about this, how proud he is to pay tithing. Then what the guy interviewing him said was, there is not one person in this office that's a member of your church, in the entire White House. But he said, I know this. I know enough about your church to know if you are a full tithe payer, you are a man of integrity. I am recommending you to be the assistant to the President of the United States and secretary to the White House. What did he conclude as a result of that? two very simple things. Number one, without integrity, nothing else matters. Number two, with integrity, nothing else matters. Our job in life is to know the truth, tell the truth, live the truth, take the heat, stay the course. That's where real success is found. That's not an easy thing to do. Know the truth, tell the truth, take the heat, live the truth, take the heat, stay the course. That's where you're going to find your power. Because those are the people who can stand up and say, I know who I am, I know what I'm here to do, and I am undistractable. That's what integrity will do for you. D, the last one. This is mind-blowing. Got to go back to Harvard again for a minute. Two surgeons, one super busy, one not very busy. Tried to figure out why. What was the difference between the two? They thought they were going to find out it was surgical abilities. Not true. They thought they were going to find out school, whatever they went to. Not true. The only thing that they can conclude, the difference between the one that was very busy and the one that wasn't very busy, was how they handled psychology. Psychology. So I looked into this. There are a lot of people in an operating room with you when you're operating. There are a lot of people in a hospital with you when you're operating. The people who were the busiest knew how to handle all those relationships. They were geniuses at it. And that's why everybody referred to them. They were good at the relationships with the referring doctors, with the nurses, with the surgical techs. They were good with all those relationships. That was their number one thing. Well, Harvard's smart. So they said, you know what? We're going to look at this a little deeper. I'm going to give you 10 points to give to your doctors. And you can rate them on all different kinds of things. They had, abilities and all these different things in there. The conclusion was that all doctors are basically equally trained. They gave 8 of the 10 points to bedside manner. Harvard then said, we got a problem. All of our programs are too difficult to get into. The people who get in here don't like dealing with people. They're putting them to sleep and they're doing surgery on them. So they resurrected. Remember, it used to be your general practitioner. Then it became your family practitioner. Now it's your primary care provider. They had to resurrect an easier program for people to get in that liked dealing with people. They made a big part of their training fit that, and they even included exit exams, because what's the nature? Remember we said in the beginning, the nature is to go vertical. Top down, narrow stairway, one at the top, everybody is beneath them. Top down. Success is horizontal. It's horizontal. Everybody's on the same level, and we're all different, but we're equal. I'll tell you an interesting thing about this. My cousin's daughter had lymphoma. So my cousin's daughter went through all her treatments and did very well. And then about a year, maybe a little bit later, she relapsed. She's in Sloan Kettering with the lead guy. So he walks in, and when she relapsed, he looked at her and he said, remember before we were fighting this disease, and it was successful? And he said, yeah. And he said, now we're fighting for your life. And then he turned around and he walked out the door. And my cousin, my Bronx cousin, yelled at him and said, hey, where are you going? This is the lead guy at Sloan Kettering. And he turned around shocked. She said, don't you walk out of here. You just told my daughter she went from fighting a disease to fighting for her life. And he walked right up to my cousin's daughter. He gave her a big hug, totally different than him, looked her in the eyes and said, I will not let you die. and then he left. She's still alive now. It's been many, many years. But he understood the relationship aspect of healing. It did not matter that he was at the top of the list. So, what's the data? People stay, pay, and refer to us first and what we do second. Data. Us and our staff. This means we can go low focus on technology. Doesn't mean we don't have to appreciate it. What we have to do is go high focus on personal touch. To do that, you got to know the truth, like I said, tell it, live it, take the heat, and stay the course. Now, finally, and we're going to go through this just quickly, but anybody in here study martial arts? Anybody, any martial artists? I don't study martial arts, but I do love the culture of it. What a martial artist does when they walk into their dojo, they face the front, and then they bow, specifically because they want to show respect for their craft, and they want to commit to keep the world outside and be fully engaged. Fully present, completely engaged. How are we going to do that? We need to get to work a half an hour early. I will tell you right now, in the beginning it will be a tough thing to do. Eventually, it'll almost become like an addiction. It will be your most productive half hour of the day. Once you're there, you're going to deal with what we call the transition time and the frictional coefficient of change. You're going from one place to another place, and this frictional coefficient of change is very difficult. For some people, it's so hard, it's like pushing a car sideways on dry pavement. Once you acknowledge that by the half hour, you've got to do the CAR procedure, which means every single person in your office has to write down anything that could be on their mind that is not related to the practice. Most of these are going to be honorable distractions, important things that are going to take you away from what you should be doing. The next thing you need to do is review your to-do list. We create those at the end of the day, and then we update them at the beginning of the day. So look at this slide. How do I show respect for what I do? Be like the martial artist. It doesn't mean when you walk in your office, you bow and you face the front of the dojo, but they really are, right from the beginning, show they respect it. They're going to keep the world out. They're going to be fully engaged, fully present, completely engaged. You have to get to work before you start work. Now, I only ask for a half an hour, but the big business people I study, they will get to work hours before they start their regular work. They will say they can accomplish more in a handful of hours after if they get there and spend time before to get organized. Work through the frictional coefficient of change, do the CAR procedure, review your to-do lists, and then I want you to do this. This is called the immersion exercise. Every one of us should have a chart of who we're dealing with that day. Look at the picture, look at the chart, and ask yourself just a few questions. What can I do to better serve this patient? Who through this patient should I be serving? And how am I going to make that happen? Now, we are going from a very passive approach to business to active. Most people stop here. They go, okay, I'll get there a half an hour early. I'll review my to-do list. What about this immersion thing? I don't care what business you're in. You want to build your business? You want more people? Do this immersion exercise. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. The next thing you do is you got to get your people together, and you must have a 10-minute touch and go meeting. Now, in this 10-minute touch and go meeting, you just have to do a few things. Review the goals, see what everybody's going to commit to doing to achieving the goals, and then spend a little bit of time on what we know works. First 2 weeks of care is critical. Chiropractic care guidelines are critical. Protocol sheets. I've got a guy right now booked out a year with new patients. Can you imagine waiting that long? Built an entire business around protocol sheets. The next thing is, at the end of the day, and I just want to focus on this and then we'll conclude, You have to have a 5-minute kind of an inspect what you expect return and report meeting. And there's a reason for this. If you do not check in with what you committed to do at the beginning of the day, you prove to your staff that you're not committed. You're not really committed. When you're not committed, you lose the locker room. The power in your practice is dependent on the power of the locker room. This is why halftime in a football game can turn things totally around. If you've got a quarterback that's lost the locker room, you lose the first half. If that quarterback cannot come back and gain the locker room, you will lose the second half. We've all seen the dramatic turnarounds. I will tell you, many of our businesses are struggling because we don't have that 10-minute touch and go meeting in the beginning. We didn't get to work a half an hour early. We didn't review our to-do list. We didn't do the CAR procedure, keep everything out of the office that doesn't involve with the office. We don't do the immersion exercise. This is where you go from a passive builder to an active builder. We don't have that 10-minute touch and go meeting, get everybody together, and then the big kahuna is we don't inspect what we expect. At the end of the day, it only takes 5 minutes. How'd we do with that? How'd we do with this? Did we achieve that goal? Because if you don't, you've lost your locker room, you've lost your locker room, you've lost your power. Now, we've gone through just a few things. We went through 5 steps. I know it's been a lot in a short period of time. We discussed the blessing called work. We discussed that healthcare is competitive, not just healthcare, life in general, trying to turn us into the second O whatever. We've recrafted, hopefully, our point of view, our perspective on adversity. We've focused on the importance of increasing our resiliency. And then we've given you a handful of procedures that show you respect your craft. I am a big believer in personal coaching. I love what Joe Montana said. If you're really committed, get a performance coach. But I also like the data. Here's the data. People who are willing to be coached have a decrease in stress, an increase in balance. They have an increase in quality of life. Their confidence goes up and their income goes up in comparison to those who don't. So the only thing we can say is it doesn't cost money, it makes money, but you got to find somebody who fits your values, and then you got to stick with it. They got to be a part of your team, because I guarantee you this, it won't be what you want, but it will be what you need. Coaching is like flying an airplane through turbulence. Anybody who goes on to succeed, in the beginning it's pretty easy and it's smooth, but the brilliance and the real success has happened for the people who hang in there through the turbulence, and then they achieve what they initially came committed to achieve. Okay, I'm just curious, that's just to wrap it up. I'm always interested in main points. Did anything jump out to anybody as we went through this? How about starting with the blessing called work? Did anybody get anything that jumped out with that?
Yes. My dad was also a really strong believer in work.
Was he?
Very strong.
Yeah.
94 when he passed away.
94.
94.
Wow.
Always worked, didn't he? That's my brother.
Oh,
Yes.
nice to see you. So,
Hard working. He retired from school, but he kept on working. He built homes, had apartments, always had work.
that's great. That's great. So that's great. What about increasing resiliency? Anybody that strike anybody? We need to increase our resiliency.
I think the forgiveness part was the one, is that the section?
Uh-huh.
I think that was the big thing.
The big thing. Yeah.
Especially with OCD people like myself, it's hard to let go of things. So.
It's hard for everybody to let go of
Yeah,
things.
that's true.
Yeah, that's great. I'll tell you what, for me, what I got out of this. Since I was 17 years old, like I said, I have always studied successful people. And one thing that I can conclude after studying successful people is every single one of them were imperfect. And in that imperfection, what I concluded was that if God could create great things through imperfect people like them, they could do it, he could do it with me. And that has become my governing strength. What I get out of this, as much as what you get out of this, is most of the limitations are limitations we put on ourselves or we have other people put on us. And that when somebody comes in and says you can do better, you can be better, you can achieve more, there's a very thin layer of people that resonate with that. Success is broken up in 20, 30, 50, and people are comfortable in each layer. The top 20% is comfortable with the top 20% stuff, and they're comfortable associating with top 20% people. The middle 30%, same thing, and the bottom 50%, same thing. I'm amazed at how this applies to all disciplines. So my final suggestion is, when you walk out of here, I want you to raise your sights, get back in the game, get out of the tent, get to the root, resolve whatever you find there, and then embrace the success that I can guarantee you will follow. So thank you for coming. You want to give us a final word? Yeah, there we go.